Hello, everyone. Hello. Good evening. And welcome to The Traverse, conversations and connections across the movement, brought to you by the Rights and Democracy Institute. This is episode 3 of our new monthly conversation series about our movements for collective liberation as we build towards a just and equitable future for all to thrive. I'm your host, Kiah Morris, and tonight we will be discussing the importance of local elected offices and an exciting new project of Rights and Democracy Institute called Catalyst Leadership. I'm joined tonight by Asma Elhuni, and we are the movement politics directors at Rights and Democracy. And tonight we will be here for your traverse and your hosts for the evening. So we'll be speaking with guest Zoraya Hightower, a city councilor in Burlington, Vermont, and a member of the Rights and Democracy Institute board. And also we're joined by Sarah Johnson, who is the executive director at Local Progress. We are thrilled to have Zoraya and Sarah on the show tonight, and we're very excited to talk about a new project of RDI called Catalyst Leadership, which we're launching in the next few weeks. But let's start the conversation off with you first, Asma. Now, you've been a community organizer for years, pushing for change. From your experiences, why are local offices important for people who care about human rights and social justice?
Thank you so much, Kiah. First of all, assalamu alaikum, everyone. That means peace be upon you. It's an Islamic greeting. Oftentimes people know the name of the president, but they don't know the names of their state reps or their city or town council members or their school board members. People tend to have less interest in politics at a state or local level, and that's probably because local politics isn't put under a microscope by the media or political pundits, even though state and local politics are just as important, and some would argue even more important because you can personally affect change locally. So an example of this is in the Upper Valley. People were detained simply for being either Black or brown by Immigration Customs Enforcement, and sometimes with the assistance of officers and police facilities. So we were trying to pass this ordinance to prevent police from racially profiling people and to ensure that police don't collaborate with ICE, which stands for Immigration Customs Enforcement. And we noticed there were several people who were on the select board that were really opposed to this ordinance. And could basically essentially stop it from passing. So we basically ran 2 progressive people. We knocked on 1,000 doors to canvass, and we got our people voted in. And so we got, by voting in our, getting our people in, we also got our ordinance as well. So this is just one example, but really people forget that local city council or select board is responsible for setting the town or city budget, and they make decisions about how money will be spent within our town, right? These are the folks who decide if roads are paved, firemen have their gear, or if bridges are safe, or how much percentage of your taxes are going to policing versus mental health professionals or community wellness coordinators. So city council members or select board members have incredible impact on our lives, right? Also thinking about positions like school boards, they create the budget that accounts for at least half of where your local property taxes go. And this gets sent off to the select board or city council to approve, but it's huge because it determines how much you prioritize, say, the school building over academics or sports, for example, or whether there are police in the hallways of schools, or whether the curriculum includes Indigenous Native voices and other marginalized voices as well, right? And there are other positions like zoning boards or supervisor of checklists who gets to decide whose votes will be counted. So local politics is extremely important, and we have more power and influence on a local level. So we're super excited because at Rights and Democracy Institute, we'll be launching this new Catalyst Leadership Program that supports people who are interested in public service and to get progressives in these roles, especially those from BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and most impacted communities. So the hope is to have a cohort that we support, and in turn, they support the community. So we're also offering trainings and resources for candidates as well. I know today we have the wonderful City Council member Zoraya here with us. Zoraya, the story I've heard is that you were inspired to run for office, including getting involved with Rights and Democracy, and joined a group of rad leaders who went to Detroit for a people's convention for the Center for Popular Democracy in the summer, I believe, of 2019. And the experience of seeing people all across the country and hearing Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib speaking helped inspire you. And just a few months later, you ran for local office and defeated an incumbent that held their seat for 35 years. And so not only did you defeat this person, but you also were the first Black woman elected to the Burlington City Council. So wow, number one. And we would like to know, can you tell us about this experience and what inspired you to run?
Yeah, so the convention was both inspiration and I think maybe completed my transformation from I hate to admit this because I know this is going to be public, from a well-meaning centrist to a leftist. I'd been raised with the notion that that because I was a woman and because I was poor and because I was Black, I was just going to have to work 3 times as hard as everyone else. And that was the way that it was. And I just had to accept that. And so I definitely kind of left Oklahoma and came to the Northeast kind of with that understanding built into me. And that in my 20s, I had to slowly unlearn that. And I think part of it was going to an Ivy League school and seeing that all these people around me aren't better than me. And I wasn't suddenly more amazing just because I went here. It's just all these narratives that are surrounded with like who's worth paying attention to and who's not. And so when I went to the convention, I remember seeing the agenda and there were a lot of things in it that were touchy-feely. And I was like, oh, I don't know if this is pragmatic. And then I went there and I was blown away. It was so amazing. And more than anything, I think what really sold me is like, one, there were all these like great emotional conversations that were really heartwarming. And I learned so much, and people that I identified with. And also just people who are like, oh yeah, this false narrative was also said about me. And I had to overcome that. And that was great. But the other thing that really captured me was like how the platform, and like, we all know what we want. We know what we want. And there I was like, and we know what is stopping us from getting it. And it's not scarcity, it's false narratives and politicians and businesses who really believe that narrative and who perpetuate it every day. And so, yeah, then I came back and I was hearing all of the ways that my city councilor was perpetuating narratives that I didn't believe in. And I ran out of frustration.
That's a really amazing story. And I appreciate that because there's so much to that. It's both in seeing and hearing the stories of the people, and it's seeing yourself within that and being able to step into and saying, this is absolutely mine to wield. It's his to yield and it's mine to wield, and taking advantage of that opportunity. And so I'm so glad that you did. What a remarkable journey. So as I'm thinking about this, what can you tell us about your specific experience that you feel highlights the importance of representation? Because you know, here you are, young professional, educated African-American woman who's a trailblazer within this body, this governmental body, changing things on such an exponential rate. How does representation matter in this instance? Even if you're bringing in identity, because there are many that say, I don't want to run on an identity. I want to just be on my politics and my policies, and not bring in my race, not bring in my gender identity, not bring in if I'm LGBTQI or any of the other important things that are part of who makes us these human beings that are trying to push this work. What has that representation look and felt like for you, and any lessons that you might have learned from it?
Yeah, it's been, well, I mean, I got elected this year, so it was, of course, shortly before the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others. And so I didn't run on a race forward platform. And I've said I didn't think that I could in Vermont because it's kind of wrapped in whiteness in so many ways. And so I really ran on a platform of economic justice, environmental justice, and then like threw an equity in there. And there were people like, what does that mean? I was like, police transformation. And so, and so then, but then, you know, May came, and it meant so much that I could be in this moment in time, because we have one other Black leader in the city council, or really we have, you know, kind of 3 Black leaders in city government in Burlington. And there's one who's very, you know, like, we need change and change needs to come, and one who's like, do we really? And, you know, the one who's like, do we really, is on the city council. And for him to have been like, if I weren't in my position now, it would have been, you know, a bunch of well-meaning white progressives standing up to this Black man saying, oh, like, we don't think you're right. And I think it's hard because, you know, people, like, again, a lot of Black people were raised with the kind of acceptability mantra, and a lot of us still have that in our heart. And so to be in this moment and look all in all kinds of ways, whether it's police reformation, whether it's economic justice, and say, I made it out of luck. Like, it wasn't, yes, I worked incredibly hard, but I know how much of my story had luck in it. And all the people that I left behind, they weren't not as worthy. They weren't as lucky. And I can say, as you know, like, I get into the room because I'm I'm palatable. I'm a well-educated, you know, like, light-skinned Black woman. But then I can speak to say, all those people who you don't find palatable, they're not different from us. And you not letting them into the room says way more about you than it does about them. And so I think that's where representation comes in, is because we know that. And the other people in the room, they don't. They think there's a real difference.
That's so powerful, and really truly owning that and being able to say, I see you and I honor you, and I recognize that we are standing on the shoulders of many others before us who've made it possible for us to be able to step into those spaces. So thank you for taking that with such grace. So, you know, it's goes without saying that you are a great example of why we are truly thrilled to be building the Catalyst Leadership Program. And one of the partners on this project is Local Progress, which is described as a movement of local elected officials advancing a racial and economic justice agenda through all levels of local government. We are elected leaders who build with power with underrepresented communities. They share bold ideas and policy among their network, and they fight to reshape what is possible in our localities all across the country. That's a big deal. We are so thrilled tonight to be joined by Sarah Johnson, who is the Executive Director of Local Progress and the former Managing Director of the Working Families Party. So Sarah, can you tell us a little bit more about Local Progress? Who's in it, why it's so important for grassroots people's movements, and how we can go about caring more about our local offices and races down ballot?
Awesome, thank you. And it's just like such a privilege to be with 3 really powerful leaders tonight. And I was thinking when preparing for this of all of the things to say about why local office is important, and Zoraya just demonstrated them like tenfold by just telling her own story, which is, so incredibly powerful. So Local Progress is over 1,000 local level elected officials across 45 states and Washington, D.C. So folks like Zoraya in cities and towns and school boards and county commissions all across the country. And maybe what I'll talk a little bit about is just by way of introduction, how I came into this work and how I came to really be very focused on local government. So I came out of a grassroots political organizing tradition in the labor movement that is, probably very similar to a lot of outside organizing work that happens. We did these like incredible strategic electoral, we'd like pick the districts and then we'd support the candidates and we'd like run on the candidates on our platforms and then we'd hold them accountable after they were elected. And it was just this vicious cycle of like, I worked for a labor union that was the Service Employees International local in New York, the majority of our members were women and people of color, janitors, security officers, cleaners, door people. And watching our members really put themselves and their, their precious hours and their hopes into these elections, often to elect these kind of mostly middle-aged, straight, cisgender men, often lawyers and other professional class folks who didn't share the goals of the union and didn't share the lived experiences of our members. They were so far away from it. And that once they were elected, we still had to do this incredible accountability work just to get them to move, basic things that that were popular. And at this time, like, Democrats were governing in New York City, in New York State, which is where I did most of my organizing. So I really wanted to start to do my political work in a different way that was centered on people rather than on policy or strategy. So I left that job and I started working for the Working Families Party, where I had the, tremendous and amazing privilege to spend 5 years doing candidate recruitment and to work with grassroots candidates who were running for office for the first time. So I started running the campaign for a 26-year-old anti-police brutality organizer who came out of a powerful immigrant rights organization called Make the Road New York. And we ran a campaign against incredible odds and lost. But I will never forget election night, because we fed 500 people at our party. And we lost, but we won. When you're feeding 500 people at your party, you won. You built the durable power. And we won because Jesus, the candidate whose campaign I was running, was not just running for himself or for his own reasons. He was running as a part of a really beautiful, permanent, durable movement home, which was Make the Road, which was a set of political allies and alliances that they had made. And, just a couple of years later, the sort of machine politics we were running against crumbled, right? So it takes time to build the kind of alternative power structures to bring new people into office. But it's just been such a privilege for me to be able to work on that throughout my career, and to really think that if we're going to find new ways of doing things, if we're going to do things that are hard, that are challenging to the status quo, that shift power in our communities, we have to start them from the ground up. So it's going to start at the local level, right? And then it's also been really amazing to me to see through local progress as our folks run for state office, run for federal office, right? How the local office is, both a very important terrain for governing, and it's also the space that people start their political careers and can go on to have, greater influence at different levels through time. So to me, that's what is really animating and motivating about our work at Local Progress, and about incredible leaders like Zoraya, who really take that step and put themselves out there.
Wow. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. And Local Progress is doing amazing work, and we're so honored to be collaborating. So I'm wondering, one of the issues that you've mentioned and that keeps coming up in our communities is efforts to remove police officers from our local public school systems. And this is an important conversation for communities to have, right? And a good example of why it's critical for our movements to have the school board members who share our commitment towards justice. And in this case, undoing policies that are connected to the school to prison pipeline. So using the example of policies like these, can you talk about how being in a cohort of elected progressives could help school board members be prepared for these conversations?
Yeah, of course. So Local Progress members across the country have been working together since 2016 on efforts to divest funding from policing, carceral, and punitive systems and invest them in community needs that truly make us safe and allow communities to thrive. We launched in 2018 a toolkit for evaluating public safety policies in localities, including a number of reforms and also a tool to help elected officials evaluate the budgetary commitments that their school districts, that their cities, that their counties were making to policing and carceral systems versus other priority community needs. And we did this because our local official members are the decision makers, right? They are negotiating the budgets, they are setting the policies around the issue of public safety. And because we knew that all of our members wanted to really bring forth a vision for public safety that is truly grounded in what communities need to be safe and to thrive. And we did it all together because it was like pretty scary for a lot of elected officials at that time to be talking openly and publicly about the need to divest from policing and invest in other community needs and social services and mental health and emergency response and a public health approach to public safety. Those kinds of conversations were pretty taboo for so many of our members, came with high political cost. And one of the reasons we started organizing around this work as Local Progress Together is so that folks could have a community of support as they were putting themselves out there, as they were taking risks, as they were pushing and doing the hard work, as they were experiencing intense, sometimes very personal blowback, threats to personal safety, and and sort of reactions from their community. So, the sort of theory of local progress is that elected officials are like all people. If we are organized, we are stronger. We learn from each other, we will accomplish more, we'll be more effective at governing. So when we think about why we really need folks at the school board level and on the inside, the work of administering this change is not like a one-time budget decision. Like, you're not like, oh, we defunded the police, we did it. It is actually about a long-term commitment to the systems and structures that our school districts and our city governments need for safe and thriving communities. And folks that are doing this work, need the sort of bureaucracy, right? Moving the bureaucracy, creating new programs is a long-term engagement that's not going to be won in one budget fight or one policy fight. So also sustaining communities of folks to work on this together over time, and with a lot of cross-learning, because in many places people are literally innovating new systems of non-police violence interruption, or figuring out how to resource counselors and mental health professionals. And, from like the big visionary to the what class of union official is this new staff position, and how do we negotiate that? Or do we do it as contract, or do we do it internal? It's like we have to kind of move between those two areas. And we've really found that local elected officials can really support each other, right, in both the big picture vision and also the total nitty gritty of the implementation and what's working in other places and what people can learn.
Wow. So I love that you called the cohort a community of support, that relies on each other. I think that's beautiful language, because like you said, they're going to need the resilience, they're going to need the stamina. So thank you so much. Zoraya, you got elected right after these similar issues around evaluating the role of police in communities, when it was coming up in the forefront in Burlington, especially after a series of disturbing use of force incidences in Burlington. Can you talk a little bit about the policies you helped advance?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two categories of policies, which one of them is like the big flashy ones, like the police ones, especially that got a lot of the attention. So some really exciting things that we got across with a resolution that we sponsored. And I have to emphasize, it was after over 1,000 people called into various city council meetings to make their voices. And none of anything in the resolution would have been possible without that kind of grassroots support and pushing folks in that direction. So But we passed a resolution that declared racism a citywide health crisis, prioritized the eradication of systemic racism in the budget. It reduced our sworn police force by 30% through attrition. It reallocated that funding to other needed services. It called to end the MOU between the city of Burlington and the school district on the use of school resource officers. It created an apology and reparations task force that just got started, and also gave the police commission additional authority and sought to create a charter change to increase their power even more. So that was one of the bigger, exciting, sweeping changes. A second thing that we're working on right now is around housing, and which I'm hoping will pass in 2 weeks. I was hoping it would pass last night, but it didn't. Is just cause eviction and making sure that folks can't get evicted for no cause. So, which is a huge problem for all kinds of folks, but especially low income, BIPOC, new American communities, and so on. So yeah, those are some of the big sweeping policies. And then a second set that just kind of comes with governing is just having eyes, again, with someone who doesn't have the false narratives on all of the policies that are constantly going through and saying, this, why is this here? Why are we talking about it like this? How do we tweak it in a way that's not making these assumptions, and so on. I'm trying to think of a good example right now, and I can't, but for council, but there was one when I was for this, I was on the development review board. And I was always a little bit self-conscious because everybody else on the board was an attorney or an architect. And then there was me, just like, I have opinions. And we were reviewing this case of somebody who wanted to convert their use downtown to residential. And everybody was like, okay, great, great, great. And everybody was about to sign off on it. And I was like, wait, this is more than 10 units. Don't 15% of them or 2 units in that case have to be affordable? And city staff had missed it. All of the attorneys had missed it, all of the architects had missed it, just because that's not their priority. That's not what they're thinking about. They tend to be like, is the design pretty enough? And so, and the owner ended up not converting it because he said, I don't want to do 2 affordable units. And so he legitimately was going to go forward without like not doing what was on the books. It's a law that's on the books. And so I think there's just every day, like looking at everything else that's going through the city and saying through the lens of someone who cares about the right things, like, does this make sense the way that it is? Do we need to change this? Do we need to remove something, add something, or just change the way we're talking about it?
I appreciate that so much. And this is such important work. And it's funded, and some of this work, this catalyst, this sort of like momentum that's happening around this is because of the divestment that was happening from looking at the use of funds for law enforcement and making those major changes. But that's a big deal. All of this is a huge, huge deal. And I actually want to go back a little bit and dig a little deeper to the example from Burlington, and just knowing everything that you had to do as a leader on this issue through those long, exhausting nights and those city council meetings that they wanted to close up early, and you all were like, we're going to keep going till midnight. We're going to make sure that people get a chance to have their voices heard. And so you have so much that you're holding. You've got the complications of the policy. And in your case, you did have professional background in public policy, but there's a lot thinking about understanding how the budget works, the union contracts with law enforcement, because those are actually pretty serious and difficult to navigate through. There's a lot of policy issues that you were navigating. Trying to pass this policy also means that you have to build a group of willing, a coalition of the willing amongst your colleagues to get enough votes. And given that this was given so much public attention, and recognizing that there have been people on the streets that were sleeping in front of the police station to show how much this was needed change. So much that you were having to deal with, as well as even threats, I'm sure, that you received for being a part and being a face of this work. And even if you were not a face of this work, just by sheerly your racial identity makes you a target. Thinking about all of these things you have to hold, what are your thoughts around what serving in public leadership roles is like for issues of this magnitude, and all the things that you had to learn as a new city councilor in order to feel that you were not only being effective and successful, but that you were coming out as a whole person at the end of this?
Mhm. Still working on that. I don't know if I've found the answer yet. But yeah, it's definitely, it's hard. And I think the first thing that's like, having met a lot more women of color over the past few months in Burlington, you know, and both trying to push them to run for office, but at the same time, you know, if it, like being like, but then being like, but emotionally, like as a friend, do you recommend it? It's like, no, I don't. I mean, everybody who's listening should definitely run for office, but at the same time, it's such a, it's a terrible emotional burden, like in terms of, you know, like first week I started getting, you know, attack emails about, you know, my identity, and clearly people who are like watching me on the screen as it's happening, being like commenting on what I'm saying, using the N-word, like all kinds of, and then very quickly it's also, yeah, immediately pivoting from, you know, having imposter syndrome, being like, how do I like figure out how to make policies with all these people, some who have been on the council for, you know, over a decade, to being like, oh, I'm just going to tell them they're wrong and that we should do it this way because I believe in what I'm saying. And yeah, and then it's also the very quickly having to get up to speed on everything. So just like the racial justice resolution, that was 2 months, maybe after 2 or 3 months after I'd been elected. And yeah, it covered all kinds of things. And some of them I had tangential experience with, but a lot of them it's, you know, like to make a, to like argue for policy, you have to be over prepared in terms of any of the things. And you know, if somebody says, oh, but the school board said this, I had to come back and say, I've already talked to 3 of the school board members and they've said that they're okay with my languages is, and you just have to be so overly prepared. And it creates this like constant, sorry, I keep talking about feelings, but it is such a big part of it. It creates this anxiety because you're always on. And I think the biggest thing to take a step back is we know that, you know, over the course of decades, right-wing groups have been left-wing groups have been pouring their money into putting band-aids on problems, not in a bad way, but, you know, like trying to fix the problems that they currently see. And right-wing groups have been putting their money into policy and into think tanks and driving narratives that are now so dominant in our conversation that it's so hard to get across them. And so all you have to do if you want to maintain the status quo is show up. You just have to show up and say the narratives that everybody's already heard a million times. And if you're trying to change the narrative, you have to do so many hours of research to say all the reasons the narrative is false, even though so many people believe it. You have to convince people that what they've heard over and over again, like that school resource officers keep kids safe, isn't substantiated and that there's no evidence for it. And you have to bring science and you have to bring it in a way that's compelling. And so I don't even remember what your question was, but it brings a lot of on that with every single issue, doing so much research on that specific issue, and then trying to find other compelling narratives that people can replace the ones that they've been hearing with for so long. And then maintaining friendships in that, because I have a temper and I've gotten upset with some of my fellow counselors because all of this stuff matters so much and you feel like if you don't get it right, the moment can pass and you won't get back to it. And so, but staying a whole person in this has definitely been, I mean, yeah, taking time to talk to other people who feel the same way, who are doing the same work, and it helps.
Well, I am incredibly excited about building a Catalyst leadership so we can support awesome leaders like Zoraya, City Council member Zoraya, and to set you up with support so that you can thrive in the ways that you need to in this public role. So thank you so much. So this question is for Sarah. Sarah, can you talk about some of the benefits of cohorts of progressive electeds in states and around the country as well. So it's not just locally, but also around the country.
Yeah. So I think there's two kind of fundamental ways that I like to think about what is created by organizing local elected officials together. The first one really speaks a lot just to everything that Zoraya just talked about the kind of experience of being an elected official. Like, it can be alienating, it is difficult, especially like, and then if you are the first woman of color, the first immigrant, like then that times 10 or 100 or a million, I'm not exactly sure. And especially unseating a 35-year incumbent is a whole different kind of disruption, right? So I think a lot of local progress is really folks being able to find and source support with each other in that helps them, again, keep the resilience and also learn things, right, that help them advance their job. I think the second thing is that it also has the potential to create waves of policy across multiple cities at the same time that can inform the state, that can inform the national context, and is, I think, a really important, has an important role to play in disrupting a lot of narratives and political narratives that have been built over time. So a really great example of this is Local Progress has a really robust state chapter in the state of New York. It has over 175 local elected officials from all across the state, from, New York City with, 8 million people to small towns upstate, right, not too far from the border with Vermont. And we have really built an intentional leadership committee for our state chapter that sets the strategy. And 2 years ago, the New York State Organizing Committee really decided to focus on housing and housing insecurity and fighting back against evictions as a core priority, working hand in glove very, very closely with community organizers across the state that were working on that as well. And there is, I think on any issue, right, there is always the ability to like isolate one crazy city. It's like, oh, just New York City is the only city in New York that wants rent control, or it's the only city in New York that wants to raise the minimum wage. I'm assuming maybe Burlington might sometimes be characterized that way too. And so by building a coalition of local elected officials committed to working in deep partnership with community across the state, we've been able to mobilize members from all kinds of communities, right? Rural communities where folks are in, like, our housing insecure in trailer parks are challenged by corporate power and the way that it limits their housing security. Folks in post-industrial cities that are, increasingly subject to gentrification as folks are moving out of New York City and experiencing lots of housing pressure. Like, the issue of evictions is consistent and exists all across really different types of communities in New York. And by building from the local level up, we can really bring folks together across those different kinds of communities to advocate together at the state level, while also doing everything they can with their local power and their own municipalities. So how do we really build the vision of the world that we want to see? Again, really starting grounded in what can we do locally, and then how do we network across our localities to push that vision at the state level, at the federal level, and also to push for structural change. So a lot of our work at Local Progress really focuses around challenging state level preemption, where in dozens of states across the country, because of conservative state legislators, because of the role of ALEC, states have increasingly diminished, purposefully taken away the power of cities to pass policy change, right? On issues ranging from workplace justice to like tree canopy regulation. So it's a pretty broad array of issues. But how do we organize from cities up to really challenge the ways that local governments are systematically and strategically disempowered, and how those decisions disproportionately impact communities of color, who are, who are in the largest cities that are preempted by state level policy. How do we fight for more funding for local government from the state and federal level? Like, sort of also contending with, let's create the structural change we need so that our municipalities can continue to be the kind of leading edge. Because I think, Asma, you said this right at the beginning, because they're the closest to the people, right? So that is where we're going to be able to make change that is most grounded in what people actually want to see.
That was a whole word right there. But it all definitely ties into things that both you said, Sarah, and what Zoraya, what you were just saying a little bit earlier. And it really pushes me to just kind of ask this question. I don't know, Sarah, if you have thoughts, and it might be good to explore a little bit more about the role that these kind of pipelines, the existing political establishment, both within our political party systems and through, corporate elites, or if we were to think about these special interests that have deep pockets and deep investments in controlling both the narrative and the policy and the outcomes. Talk to us a little bit about that, about what you've seen as far as creating candidate pipelines to advance their agenda.
Yeah, I am not a scholar of like far right infrastructure, or really of political parties, although I'm learning a lot more about them. I mean, the thing that I think a lot about is, and Zoraya, I really love the way that you sort of characterize, like, we sort of do these Band-Aid, we run a campaign, we pass a bill, we fix one problem, whereas the right wing is much more focused on deep narrative work that actually shifts our consciousness. I would also say that, I think generally in the progressive movement, like, we have not focused enough on people and on leaders, and on people as agents of change, and on people in a way that isn't like an issue campaign or a policy solution or a bucket, but is actually about cultivating and developing the leadership that we need to govern. And like, government is what we have, right? We are not trying to destroy government. We are trying to build it to help shepherd the world that we would like to see. So like, it's even more astonishing to me, given that we have been so not nearly, I think, as focused on people and on leaders and on supporting leadership trajectories, because we definitely need them. We won't succeed in extracting from government the demands that we want. We have to take power and figure out how to create a new thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm really excited about this Catalyst leadership cohort that we have. And we've been doing trainings already. And I believe, Kiah, you had one last night. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have a meeting coming up on December 5th. We'll have New Hampshire and Vermont elected officials, and we'll have people who are also interested in public service or running for office. So Zoraya, if elected officials or people interested in exploring perhaps running for office are listening at this moment to the show, can you tell me why they should help be a part of this Catalyst leadership?
Yeah, so the first reason I'm going to say is what Sarah just said, is because people are agents for change. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be, I'm not particularly special. I mean, I am special, but I'm not more special than anyone else on this call or who's listening. And so we just have to get folks running and up there, and to be part of supporting current leaders and become leaders themselves, because ultimately we just need more progressive leaders, and that's what's gonna make the change. And then the second part that I would say is that there is I do think that this is I'm also not a scholar of movements, but I think that this is a moment in history that's another movement, and I think we all want to be part of it. And I think this is a great way to plug in and figure out what that looks like. For example, like Sarah was just talking about just cause eviction, like we're just figuring that in Burlington, but Like, you betcha that even though I'm the city councilor for Burlington, I want to see that happen in Winooski and South Burlington. And if we can build, like, we had months of discussion on it in Burlington, that can be so easily copied to Winooski, because they have to go through the same voting processes. They have to go through the same state legislature. And if all of us are banging, on our state representatives' doors and saying, we all want this, they have to vote for everybody's. And so, yeah, there's a movement on the rise, and this is a way to be part of it.
Appreciate that very much, very, very much. And there is so much that's great about the Catalyst Leadership Program. Again, as Asma was saying, us thinking about trainings and ways that we can help support folks, and as well as some of our leaders, because this moment in time also raised up a whole cohort of unexpected leaders who stepped in and were on the front lines of their protests, were organizing people with no organizing experience and have stepped into this. And we need to keep our folks not only in this movement work, but help to, again, thinking comprehensively about how we're supporting each other through this incredibly difficult task that we have of trying to undo centuries of really great messaging from the opposition that's not working for the benefit of the people, right? We have so much work to do, and we have to be able to stay in this. And so building this community is going to be so key, so key. So Zoraya, again, just to remind everyone, we also have the great pleasure of having Zoraya serving on our Rights and Democracy Institute board. Can you tell us about our exciting Human Rights Award event that's coming up on December 10th?
Yes, absolutely. So December 10th is the International Human Rights Day, which commemorates the Universal Declaration of Human Rights signed 7 decades ago. And the Rights and Democracy Institute will have its annual fundraiser where we honor local work advancing human rights. This year, we'll be honoring the NCAACP chapters in Vermont, Green Mountain Mask Makers, the New Hampshire Black Lives Matter chapters, and National Employment Law Project and Rural Democracy Initiatives. Guest speakers will include George Gull, the Director of People's Action, and Alicia Garza, co-founder of Black Lives Matter and author of a great new book, The Purpose of Power. We hope everyone listening can join, as it will be virtual this year, and you can go to rights-democracy.org to find a place to RSVP for tickets.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm really, truly excited about this. What a fantastic night. It's going to be really great. And it's also going to include a very special performance by the Vermont Resistance Revival Chorus. And I believe that everyone who gets a ticket will also be receiving a special new face mask. RDI, show it off. We will be putting links to the event in the chat and in the comments. So I do hope that you will come and join us for the celebration, 5 years of going strong.
Ooh, so we are about running out of time. So I want to give a special thank you so much to Zoraya, Sarah, and Kiah, all of you for joining us for this episode of Traverse. We'd love to hear from you and what your thoughts of this show were. We also want to hear your ideas for future shows. You can find us at rightsanddemocracy.org and Rights and Democracy Institute on Facebook. And remember, like, the truth is, who is in office matters. It impacts all of our lives, and we have to run a new generation of leadership that doesn't settle for the way things are and continues to perpetuate harm. So they're basically relying on us to be comfortable with the mentality that who's in power, we can't control, right? But it's a new day, and people are realizing that they can run for office. And now there are groups like Rights and Democracy Institute that can help them not only run, but also support them while they're in office too. So thank you so much for joining us today. Until next time, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.